Welcome to our deep dive into the world of migraines. We're going to explore this complex neurological condition that brings recurring headaches and seriously impacts daily life. Whether you experience migraines yourself or know someone who does, I think you'll find this exploration pretty insightful.
Absolutely. And it's surprisingly common, especially among women, with cases often peaking in middle age.
It really is fascinating how something so prevalent can still hold so much mystery. So let's get right to it. What's the latest on what actually causes these migraines?
You'd think with how common they are, we'd have it all figured out, but the exact root cause is still somewhat elusive. We know it involves abnormal brain activity that disrupts nerves, blood vessels, and even impacts key brain chemicals.
So there's not just a bad headache, there's a whole neurological cascade happening in there.
Precisely. And to complicate things further, genetics seem to play a role too. Migraines often run in families, suggesting there's a genetic component to this susceptibility.
It's like inheriting the potential for migraines. But whether that potential is fully realized depends on a whole bunch of other factors. I've always wondered about the connection between hormones and headaches. Could you shed some light on that?
Of course. Hormonal fluctuations, especially in estrogen, can be a major migraine trigger, particularly for women. Think about the shifts that happen during menstruation, pregnancy, and menopause, prime migraine territory for some.
So it's like those hormonal shifts create a ripple effect that can sometimes lead to a migraine.
That's a good way to put it. But it's not just hormones, right? There's a whole host of environmental factors that can also set things off.
Yeah, I've heard things like weather changes can be a trigger. What's the science behind that?
Changes in barometric pressure, which often accompany weather shifts, seem to be the culprit for some people. And it's not just weather. Things like flickering lights or even strong odors can trigger a migraine episode.
That makes sense. It's like sensory overload can actually tip the scales for some individuals. Also really curious about the food connection. Is it true that things like aged cheese and red wine can be migraine triggers?
While everyone is different, research suggests certain foods and drinks might increase the likelihood of a migraine for some people. Aged cheeses and processed meats, for example, contain compounds like tyramine and nitrates that some researchers believe may be involved.
So there might be specific compounds in food that trigger a reaction.
That's what some researchers suspect. And it's not just food. Things like alcohol, especially red wine with its tannins and sulfites, have also been linked to migraines. And even caffeine withdrawal can be a trigger for some.
Wow, so navigating the world with migraines is like walking through a minefield of potential triggers.
In a way, yes. But I think it's important to remember that these are potential triggers, not guarantees. What affects one person might not affect another. And a food that triggers a migraine one day might not have the same effect the next.
So it's all about figuring out your personal triggers and what works best for you.
Exactly. And another crucial piece of the puzzle is lifestyle. Things like stress and sleep play a huge role.
I can definitely relate to that. Lack of sleep and high stress always seem to make things worse for me. But how exactly do those factors contribute to migraines?
Well, when we're stressed, our bodies release hormones like cortisol, which can affect blood vessel function and neurotransmitters in the brain, both implicated in migraines. And irregular sleep patterns, whether it's too much or too little sleep, can disrupt our body's natural rhythms and make us more susceptible to those neurological shifts that lead to migraines.
It all starts to make so much more sense when you understand those underlying mechanisms. So we've got genetics, hormones, environment, and lifestyle, all tangled up in this complex web that contributes to migraines. But how do you actually know if what you're experiencing is a migraine and not just a bad headache? Is there a way to tell the difference?
That's a great question, and it leads us to one of the most fascinating aspects of migraines. The different stages they often progress through. It's not always cut and dry, but migraines often unfold in stages, each with its own unique characteristics. And understanding these stages can be really empowering for managing the condition.
Okay, walk me through these migraine stages. What kind of journey are we talking about here?
It often starts with what's called the prodrome phase, a kind of early warning system hours or even days before the headache hits. You might notice subtle shifts like mood swings and unusual cravings, fatigue, or even neck stiffness.
It's like your body is sending out these little hints that something bigger is brewing.
Exactly. And then for some people, about 25% comes the aura phase. This is where things get really interesting. Auras are temporary, but can involve a range of neurological symptoms like visual disturbances, tingling sensations, numbness, even difficulty speaking.
Visual disturbances, what does that look like?
People describe seeing flashing lights, shimmering zigzags, blind spots, or even experiencing temporary vision loss.
That sounds intense.
It can be, But the key thing to remember is that aura symptoms are reversible. And then, of course, comes the main event, the headache attack itself.
The part we all dread. Could you paint a picture of what a migraine headache actually feels like?
It varies from person to person, but most describe it as intense throbbing or pulsating pain, often concentrated on one side of the head. This can last anywhere from 4 to 72 hours if untreated. Light and sound often become unbearable. Nausea and vomiting are common, and even the slightest movement can worsen the pain.
It sounds completely debilitating. I can see how it would just take over your life for those hours or even days.
It absolutely can, and as if that wasn't enough, there's often a postdrome phase, a kind of migraine hangover that can linger for up to a day after the headache subsides.
Wait, there's more, even after the headache is
I
gone.
know it's brutal. During this postdrome phase, people often describe feeling drained, washed out, or even mentally foggy.
So is it this four-part saga of misery that just takes you out of commission completely? Is there any way to predict when these episodes might hit?
Unfortunately, migraines can be unpredictable, but recognizing your own personal triggers and early warning signs can sometimes give you a heads up.
And speaking of triggers earlier, we talked about common culprits, like food stress and sleep. But I'm curious, for someone who really wants to get a handle on their triggers, how do you recommend they go about tracking all of this?
That's where the power of a migraine diary comes in. It might sound simple, but it's one of the most effective tools for taking control of your migraines.
Okay, so tell me more about this migraine diary. What exactly should people be tracking?
It's all about making connections and noticing patterns. You want to record the date and time of each migraine, the severity of the pain, any medications you take, and then start digging into potential triggers. What did you eat that day? How much sleep did you get the night before? Were you feeling stressed? Even seemingly insignificant details like changes in the weather or your menstrual cycle can provide valuable clues.
It's like becoming your own migraine detective.
Exactly. The more data you collect, the more likely you are to uncover those hidden triggers and patterns that you might not have noticed otherwise.
So it's about empowering yourself to understand those individual nuances of your migraine experience.
Precisely. And this information is incredibly valuable for your doctor as well. It helps them tailor a treatment plan that's specifically designed for you.
Speaking of treatment, let's dive into what options are available. I know there are medications that can help, but are there other approaches people can take?
There are actually two main categories of treatment. Acute treatments designed to relieve symptoms during an attack, and preventative treatments aimed at reducing the frequency and severity of future episodes.
Okay, that makes sense. So let's start with acute treatments. What are some of the go-to options for finding relief during a migraine attack?
For mild to moderate migraines, over-the-counter pain relievers like ibuprofen aspirin or acetaminophen can sometimes be enough to take the edge off.
Those are good standbys to have on hand. But what about when those aren't cutting it?
For more severe cases, your doctor might prescribe triptans. These are medications that specifically target migraine symptoms by constricting blood vessels and blocking pain pathways in the brain.
Triptans seem to be the gold standard for migraine treatment these days.
They can be very effective, but they're not for everyone. There are also ergotamines, which work in a similar way, but tend to have more side effects, so they're less commonly prescribed.
It's good to know there are options even for those who don't respond well to triptans.
And don't forget about antiemetics. These medications target nausea and vomiting, which can be a real game changer for those who experience those debilitating symptoms during a migraine.
That's such a good point. It's easy to focus on the head pain, but those accompanying symptoms can be just as awful.
Absolutely. And that brings us to preventative treatments, which are all about reducing those migraine attacks in the first place.
Let's talk about that.
Yeah.
What kind of options are available on the preventative side?
There are a number of medications your doctor might recommend, depending on your individual needs and medical history. These include beta blockers, antidepressants, anticonvulsants, and even newer drugs like CGRP inhibitors, which have shown a lot of promise.
CGRP inhibitors, I've heard those are pretty cutting edge. How do those work?
They're pretty remarkable. Instead of targeting a broad range of brain chemicals, CGRP inhibitors specifically block a molecule called calcitonin gene-related peptide, or CGRP, which is thought to play a key role in those pain signaling pathways that lead to migraine attacks.
It's like they're zeroing in on the root of the problem. Are there any side effects?
Like all medications, they can have side effects, but they tend to be less problematic than some of the older preventative medications.
That's good to know. But medications aren't the only option, right? I've also heard Botox can be helpful for migraines.
You're absolutely right. Botox injections are FDA approved for chronic migraine prevention and seem to work by blocking the release of certain neurotransmitters involved in pain signaling.
So Botox isn't just for wrinkles anymore.
Nope. It has a surprising range of medical applications.
It's amazing how something we associate with aesthetics can be used to address such a complex neurological condition. But what about non-drug approaches? Are there lifestyle modifications that can help prevent migraines?
Absolutely. Lifestyle plays a huge role in migraine management. One of the most important things is establishing a regular sleep schedule. Getting enough sleep and going to bed and waking up around the same time each day helps regulate your body's natural rhythms and can make a real difference.
I know when I'm sleep deprived, I'm way more susceptible to headaches.
And as we talked about earlier, stress is another huge trigger. Finding healthy ways to manage stress through exercise, yoga, meditation, or spending time in nature can be incredibly beneficial.
Stress management is essential for overall well-being, but it sounds like it's especially crucial for those prone to migraines.
And let's not forget about diet. We talked about those potential food triggers, but making sure you're staying well hydrated is also key, as dehydration can be a trigger in itself. Some research suggests that supplements like magnesium and riboflavin might offer a protective effect against migraines.
So it's a holistic approach. Sleep, stress management, diet, and potentially some targeted supplements.
Exactly. And remember those environmental triggers we discussed earlier. Well, minimizing your exposure to those culprits can go a long way in preventing migraines. If you know that flickering lights or strong odors tend to set you off, try to avoid those situations whenever possible.
That makes sense. Avoid what you can and manage what you can't. But what about those situations where despite your best efforts, a migraine still hits? What can people do in the midst of an attack to find some relief?
That's a great question, and it's important to have a plan in place for when those breakthrough migraines occur. One of the most effective things you can do is create a migraine-friendly environment for yourself. Find a quiet, dark room where you can rest undisturbed. Applying a cold compress or ice pack to your forehead or neck can also help reduce inflammation and numb the pain.
So it's about creating a sanctuary where you can ride out the storm.
Exactly. And of course, if you've been prescribed medication for acute attacks, be sure to take it as directed by your doctor.
We've covered so much ground today, from the underlying science to the latest treatments and coping strategies. But before we wrap up, I'd love to get your take on the future of migraine treatment. Are there any exciting developments on the horizon?
There's a lot to be excited about. The field of migraine research is constantly evolving, and we're seeing some really promising new therapies emerge. For example, neuromodulation devices, which use electrical or magnetic stimulation to target specific areas of the brain, are showing potential for both acute treatment and prevention.
So instead of relying solely on medication, we're starting to explore ways to directly modulate those brain signals that contribute to migraines.
Exactly. And the beauty of these devices is that they offer a non-invasive, non-drug approach for some people. We're also seeing advancements in medication with newer and more targeted therapies becoming available all the time.
It sounds like there's a lot to be hopeful about for those living with migraines.
I think so too. With increased awareness, ongoing research, and this movement towards a more holistic approach to management, I believe the future for people with migraines is brighter than ever.
It's inspiring to hear such optimism from someone on the front lines of migraine research. This deep dive has been incredibly eye-opening for me, and I'm sure our listener feels the same way. As we wrap things up, I'd love to hear what resonated most with you, what surprised you, and what will you do differently going forward?
That's a great question. For me, it's always a good reminder that knowledge is power. The more we understand about migraines, the more equipped we are to manage them effectively. Whether it's identifying personal triggers, trying new therapies, or simply advocating for yourself within the healthcare system, there are so many steps you can take to reclaim control and improve your quality of life.
It's been amazing to explore this complex condition with you and uncover those hidden layers of knowledge. I hope our listener feels empowered to continue this journey of discovery on their own.
Absolutely. And remember, you're not alone in this. There are countless resources and support networks available to help you navigate the ups and downs of migraines.
Well said. As we close out this deep dive, I want to leave our listener with one final thought. Now that you've gained a deeper understanding of migraines, what further questions do you have? Where will you go to explore them? Keep learning, keep asking questions, and never give up hope.
A brighter future for those living with migraines is within reach.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the world of migraines. Until next time.